I never imagined that one day, while rummaging through old boxes in my mother's attic, I would uncover a secret capable of turning my life upside down. What I thought was just an old photograph, a yellowed image of someone my heart stubbornly insisted it recognized, turned out to be the key to a truth buried for decades. A forgotten brother, a shattered family, and a web of lies that threaten not only our past but our future. When I decided to pursue this story, I had no idea what was waiting for me. With every step, the sense of danger grew, whispers in the shadows, doors slamming shut, veiled threats that made it clear. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden. But I couldn't stop. Not after discovering that Gabriel, my brother, wasn't just a name lost in time, but a soul carrying deep wounds and a truth that could shake everything. Today I tell this story so that no one else has to suffer in silence. So that the courage of a forgotten brother becomes a cry for justice and transformation. Get ready to dive into a journey full of revelations, betrayals, and battles that forever changed the destiny of one family. Are you ready to discover what I discovered? Because believe me, nothing will ever be the same. I used to think I knew who I was. That my life, even with its pain, was built on solid truths, with roots firmly planted in the soil of what we call family. I grew up hearing that my mother was strong, that my father was fair, that our story had been simple. A marriage for love, a planned daughter, and a modest but dignified life. I believed that with a childlike faith even as an adult. Until the day I found a box, among the moths and silence in the back closet. A regular cardboard box, covered with an old sheet. We were clearing out the house after my father died. A massive heart attack too sudden for goodbyes. My mother, detached, simply asked me to help organize the junk from the past. But what was inside that box wasn't junk. It was a secret. A loose thread capable of unraveling the entire tapestry of my existence. Inside I found letters. Dozens. Handwritten, the ink already faded. Signed by someone named Elias. And among them there was a photo. A boy maybe 7 or 8 years old. Dark hair, serious expression, and something in his eyes that froze me. They were my eyes. Not similar, the same. Exactly the same. On the back of the photo, a shaky handwritten note. For when she's ready to know. At that moment, the air grew heavier. I sat on the floor with the box beside me, my heart pounding like something inside me was about to explode. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And even without understanding it fully, I knew that child wasn't a distant cousin or an old neighbor. Something primal and instinctive whispered the truth. That boy was my blood. I showed everything to my mother that very night. She hesitated for long seconds before picking up the photo, and then her face collapsed. For the first time in years, I saw my mother cry without trying to hide it. It wasn't an ordinary cry. It was the sobbing of someone who had carried a burden for far too long. "You had a brother, Isadora," she said, her voice breaking. "Before you were born. I had a son, but I was forced to give him away." That sentence pierced me like a knife. My world, until then so orderly, so full of certainties, simply fell apart. Brother. Brother I had never known. A brother who had been erased from our story as if he never existed. "Why?" I asked. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She lowered her eyes. "Because I tried to forget. Because remembering him hurt more than you can imagine. And because I failed him. I left him. I stayed silent. I wanted to scream, to ask everything at once. Where was he? What was his name now? Did he know about us? Was he still alive?" But the questions got stuck in my throat, choked by the shock. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room with the letters spread out in front of me, reading them one by one. The man who wrote, Elias, said he loved that boy, said he would try to find him, said he would never accept the separation. But at some point the letters stopped. There were no more dates. Only emptiness. Absence. And then a question started pounding inside me. What if he's still alive? What if he's out there not knowing he has a sister? That there's a history that was stolen from him? I had to know. I had to find him. Even if it meant facing the ghosts of my own mother. Even if it changed everything. The following days were a whirlwind of memories that weren't mine, but somehow now belonged to me. Every word in those letters seemed to vibrate inside me, as if I'd been summoned to retrieve something sacred, something buried by fear and silence. My father, the man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike, who put band-aids on my scraped knees. Did he know? The question burned inside me. I waited for the right moment, if there even is such a thing, and asked my mother. She looked at me like someone carrying a sin too old to be redeemed. He knew, but he never wanted to talk about it. He said the past wouldn't change the present, that accepting me with everything I carried was enough. That hurt, because it meant they had chosen to tell me a version of the truth, edited, filtered. And I grew up believing it, obedient, unaware that an entire chapter of my life was missing. With the few details I had, the name Elias, the dates on the letters, and the likely age of the boy, I started a search that bordered on impossible. I combed through old records, forums about illegal adoptions, social networks with similar names. I sent messages to strangers. Every time I found a familiar-looking face, I felt a chill. Was it him? Did he grow up okay? Would he hate me for showing up now so late? Then a name appeared. Gabriel Elias Lima. Architect, 38 years old. A basic profile on a professional registration site. But the photo, my God, the photo. I froze. There was something in that look. The same detail in the shape of the eyes I saw every morning in the mirror. The same introspective expression I always had as a child. I spent 2 hours staring at that image. Then I took a deep breath and wrote a simple, almost shy message. Hi. I know this may sound strange, but I believe we might be related by blood. Your name came up among some old family documents. I can explain better if you'd like to talk. I sent it. And waited. 3 days went by with no response. 3 days where time stretched like a rope about to snap. On the third day, a message came. Hi. We can talk. I admit your message scared me a little, but I'm curious. Call me. My heart raced. I called. The voice on the other end was calm, but with a layer of caution. It was as if he was trying to stay composed while something inside him was being shaken. And he was right. I told him everything. No flourishes, no drama. The letters, the photo, the name Elias. And what my mother finally confessed. On the other end, silence spoke louder than any word. I was adopted, he finally said. But I never knew anything. Just the name of my biological mother. I never knew someone was looking for me. That sentence broke me in two. We arranged to meet on Saturday. A quiet cafe in a neutral neighborhood. It was better that way. Away from memories, away from family burdens. I spent the days rehearsing what to say, but deep down, I knew nothing I said could prepare a heart for this kind of reunion. On Saturday, he arrived before me. And when I saw him, I knew for sure. It was him. Gabriel saw me first. He stood up slowly with a mix of caution and curiosity. And when our eyes met, it was as if time had torn a silent rift in the present. A recognition without explanation. A silence that said more than any word could. We sat facing each other. He was taller than I expected. He had an analytical gaze, as if trying to decipher who I was before I even said a word. The resemblance was obvious. Not just in our features, but in something deeper. Maybe an ancestral sadness. A kind of emptiness that lives in those who lost something before even knowing they had it. So, we're siblings? He asked, trying to smile, though the smile died before it was born. Yes. At least, that's what everything points to. I took a copy of the photo and one of the letters from my bag. I slid them across the table to him. He picked them up gently like sacred relics. Elias. He repeated the name like someone trying to recall a dream. That name sounds familiar. I saw it somewhere when I was younger, but I don't remember how. The conversation moved slowly. We spoke about my childhood, about his. He grew up with a stable family but always felt something was out of place. He had unanswered questions, gaps that his adoptive parents could never fill. They were good to me, he said, but I always felt like there was a shadow in the corner of the room. Always. Telling him about our mother was the hardest part. He didn't show anger, nor relief. Just a void that seemed to already live inside him. Is she still alive? Yes. Still in the same house. His fragile. He nodded, staring at his coffee cup as if it had something to say. Maybe one day I'll want to see her. But not now. I need time to process all this. And I understood. The conversation lasted 2 hours, but it felt like 10 minutes. At the end, he looked into my eyes and said, "If all this is true, then you're the only part of my story that remains. I want to get to know you. But slowly. Is that okay?" I nodded, feeling something I couldn't name. Relief, fear, hope. I left the cafe with teary eyes and a suspended soul. Something had changed in me, like I had stepped through a mirror and now lived in a world where nothing was what it seemed. But that was only the first crack. That night, rummaging through the box again, I found something I'd missed before. A sealed envelope. No sender. The same shaky handwriting as the letters. I opened it carefully. Inside was just a single page. 2 handwritten sentences. He was never supposed to be born. But I couldn't stop it. And when you learn the whole truth, you'll hate me too. There was no signature. And suddenly, finding my brother wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. That night, the envelope remained open on my desk like an open wound. I read and reread it, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves and say something different. Something lighter. Something that didn't carry the cruel weight of that phrase. He was never supposed to be born. Who would write something like that? And why? The handwriting, though shaky, wasn't my mother's. I was sure of it. Her letters, old notes, even the signatures on her notebooks, all were different. And then an absurd thought crossed my mind. Could it have been from my father? My father, the just, honest, loving man. The idea that he could carry such hatred was inconceivable. And yet, the doubt took root. I had always known him as my father. But who was he before me? Who was he before becoming my mother's husband? I returned to the box. I examined every corner, every paper fold, hoping to find any clue, any signature, something that could lead me to the source of that note. And then I found it, tucked inside an old poetry book. A thin notebook, navy blue cover filled with firm masculine handwriting. It was a diary. His. The first pages spoke of his youth, moving to Sao Paulo, working at a print shop. Nothing remarkable. But as I kept reading, the writing grew denser. Words crossed out, sentences left unfinished. And then, on a page stained by time, one entry dated November 3, 1985, made me hold my breath. She wouldn't listen to me. Said it was too late. That she was pregnant. I screamed. Not because I didn't want the child, but out of fear. Because I knew who the real father was. And it wasn't me. My body went cold. I read and reread those lines, trying to translate them like a forgotten language. The next line was furiously scribbled, unreadable. But the message was there, hanging in the air like a cursed whisper. Gabriel wasn't my father's son. And more than that, there was a suggestion of something even darker. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. The next morning I went to my mother. She was sitting on the porch, staring at the sky like she was waiting for an answer that would never come. I sat beside her, took the note from my pocket and placed it in her hands. She didn't ask where it came from. He didn't need to. For a few seconds time stood still. Then she said to me in the lowest voice I've ever heard come out of her mouth. He found out. And he never forgave me. Found out what, Mom? She took a while to answer. Her eyes were glassy, but there were no tears. It was as if even that had run dry. Gabriel, he's not just my son. He's the child of someone who took away my choice. I was 18. I didn't want it. But back then we didn't say those things out loud. The family covered it up. His name was erased from the records. They sent me to the countryside. Said they'd take care of it. My stomach twisted. You were assaulted? The word came out like a strangled whisper. She simply nodded. A sickening silence settled between us. It was like the whole world had changed color. Did Dad know about this? He found out. I told him a year after we got married. That's when I discovered the child had survived, that he'd been put up for adoption. He couldn't handle it. Said he'd never be able to love a child born from that man. But he promised he'd never tell you. I felt physically ill. A nausea that came from the bottom of my soul. The entire structure of my identity was collapsing. And the worst part was knowing that, in the middle of all this pain, there was someone who still had no idea what was coming. Gabriel. He had no clue where he came from. And now I was the keeper of a secret that could destroy him, or save him depending on how it was revealed. I went back home without saying another word. And for the first time I began to wonder if discovering my brother had really been a gift. Or a curse. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of the revelation wouldn't let me rest. I tossed and turned in bed, the sheets wrapping around me like they were trying to hold me down. I knew I had to tell Gabriel. He deserved to know. He deserved the truth about his origin, even if it shattered everything he believed about himself. But how do you tell someone they were born out of violence? How do you look into the eyes of a brother you've just found and say that his entire life was built on a hidden, silenced wound? In the dark of my room, I began to feel fear. Not just about what Gabriel might think, but also about what could happen if I kept digging. That same night, while mentally organizing how and when I'd tell him everything, I received a notification on my phone. An anonymous message. No name. No picture. Just one sentence. "Stop digging. You won't like what you find." I froze. For a second I thought it was a sick joke. But the harshness of the words, the exact moment it was sent, it wasn't coincidence. Someone was watching me. I went back to the box of old papers, picked up my father's journal again, flipping through it more carefully. Near the final pages, I found a name scribbled in the corner, almost like an afterthought. Dr. Marcelo L. Godoy, Psych. It didn't make sense at first glance, but I wasn't in a position to ignore any clue. I looked up the name online and found an old profile in a directory. A forensic psychologist, now retired. The next day, after some persistent calls, I got him to agree to see me. I went to his small downtown office. The walls smelled of mold and memory. He was a thin man with dry skin and deep-set eyes. When I explained why I was there and showed him my father's journal, he let out a deep sigh and told me something that chilled me to the bone. "Your father came to me in the early 90s. He was convinced there was something wrong with the boy. Not emotionally, genetically. He said there was violence in his blood." "Violence?" I asked, stunned. "Yes. He believed the boy's biological father was dangerous. A man with a criminal history, possibly even murder. But there was no proof. Just suspicions, fragmented memories from your mother. He said he was afraid that past would come back through the boy." My hands started to sweat. It was a mix of outrage and disbelief. How could anyone condemn a child for the blood they carried? "What happened next?" I asked, barely able to speak. "Your father never came back. I think he decided it was best to forget. Suppress it all." I left that office feeling like I was walking through a minefield. Every step toward the truth seemed to awaken something long buried. And worse, I didn't know if it was real or just the echo of my father's obsessions. Gabriel kept texting me. Simple things. Attempts to connect. "I dreamed we were kids together. Feels weird to say this, but I feel like I already know you." My heart ached, because I knew that fragile bond we were building could shatter at any moment. And then, on a quiet afternoon, I opened the box one last time. I dug deep, as if searching for something I didn't even know existed, until I found a small envelope hidden beneath a false cardboard bottom. Inside was a single photo. My mother, still young, beside a man I had never seen before. And on the back, a date, December 1984, and a scribbled sentence. "He came back. And this time he threatened to take the baby." The floor vanished beneath my feet. That man in the photo, could he be Gabriel's biological father? And more than that, if he threatened to take the baby, then maybe he didn't disappear willingly. Maybe he was silenced. And maybe someone is still trying to make sure the truth never comes out. I knew that feeling. The chill down the back of my neck. The invisible weight on my shoulders. The irrational certainty that there were eyes where there should be none. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia. Exhaustion maybe. The emotional toll of so many revelations in such a short time. But it wasn't. It started with footsteps behind me on the way back from the market. Footsteps that stopped when I stopped. That vanished the moment I turned around. Then came the noises on the porch at night. And once, just once, when I approached the window, I was sure I saw a shadow across the street. Standing still. Watching. I began double-locking everything. Checking windows. Sleeping with the hallway light on like when I was a child afraid of monsters. The difference now was that the monsters weren't in my closet. They were alive. And they knew more than I did. I started reviewing everything again. The documents, the letters, my father's diary, the photo of the mysterious man. I tried to find official records under that name. Nothing. No ID, no social security, no birth certificate. As if he never existed, or had been erased. That's when I made a decision. I couldn't keep Gabriel in the dark. He had to know. Not all the details yet, but something. A beginning. A smaller truth, perhaps. A seed. We met at the same cafe. He seemed lighter, like someone who'd begun to hope for the bond between us to grow. And that hurt. Because I knew that lightness was about to shatter. "Gabriel," I began, my voice rough. "I need to tell you something. But I don't know how you'll take it." He looked at me, serious, but not afraid. been trusting. I think you were separated from our mother for more than just family reasons. There was something traumatic, secret, and more people are involved than just her and Dad. There are hidden records, and possibly someone dangerous in our past." He said nothing for a while. Then calmly, "I've always felt like something was wrong with me. Not my personality, my silence, but the way people looked at me, like I was carrying something I didn't understand." I sighed. "None of this is your fault, Gabriel. But is there someone who thinks it is?" I didn't answer. The truth is, I didn't know. On the way back, I stopped at the old local records office. I requested access to birth, adoption, and death records from the 1980s. I gave them names, dates, places. Some clerks were kind, others not so much. One of them, an older woman, hesitated when she heard the name of the supposed biological father. "That name reminds me of an old case," she muttered. "An unresolved disappearance." My heart raced. Disappearance? Was he declared dead? Officially no. But after 1985, no one ever mentioned him again. And the documents vanished. Vanished. Another piece of the puzzle was falling apart before it could fit. I returned home with my mind spinning. With each new answer, more questions emerged. And now I was certain someone was erasing this past. And they weren't doing it alone. That night, before bed, I heard the sound on the porch again. I got up with my heart in my throat, walked to the door with my phone in hand, camera ready. But there was no one there. Just an envelope. Sealed with black tape. No sender. Inside, a single photograph. Of me. From behind, in front of the registry office. Taken that very same day. Below the image, a sentence written in block letters. "You're digging your family's grave. Close the box or it will bury you." I held the photo like it was shattered glass. There I was, defenseless, captured from an angle that revealed someone had been very close. Close enough to watch me photograph me and vanish without a trace. I went back inside shaking. Locked every door and window. For the first time, I truly considered I might be in danger. This wasn't just about family secrets anymore. Someone was hunting me. And not just for the truth, but to make me stop looking for it. Still, there was a strange certainty growing inside me. If they were trying to silence me, it meant I was getting close. The next day, I found the address of an old friend of my mother. Someone mentioned in a few old letters signed as Nia. The letters were tender, conspiratorial, as if between them there was more than friendship. A loyalty born from shared fear. Nia lived in a modest house in a distant neighborhood, surrounded by dogs and plants overflowing onto the sidewalk. When I opened the gate, she looked at me with silent shock, as if she recognized me from a past life. "You're Marcia's daughter, aren't you?" I nodded. "I knew one day you'd come." We went in. The house smelled of cake and old secrets. We sat at the table, and before I could ask anything, she began to speak. "Gabriel, he was never a secret to me. I saw your mother pregnant. I held that baby in my arms. I saw the terror in her eyes when she found out he would be taken away." "Taken where?" I asked, my throat dry. "Far away. The family wanted to hush up the scandal. Said it would be better for everyone. A powerful, dangerous man had forced the situation. And when Marcia threatened to go to the police, the threats began. Her father, your grandfather, arranged it all. A temporary home. Then adoption. And silence. Silence." The word hit like a bullet. "Do you know who the biological father was?" She looked at me, hesitant. "Not by name. Just a nickname. Everyone called him Cruzado. A dark type, the kind who spoke quietly and scared you just by looking. I saw him once, coming after your mother. Filthy, drunk, promising to take the baby when it was born. She cried so much, my God. Cruzado." The nickname echoed like a shadow. A figure everyone avoided. "Did he disappear?" I asked. "After a while, yes. They said he left. Others said someone took care of him. No one knows for sure. But no one dared to ask." I returned home with that name engraved in my mind. Cruzado. The nickname, the threat, the source of all the pain. He was the central piece. But as soon as I entered, I noticed something was wrong. My things had been disturbed. Small details out of place. A tilted shelf, a slightly open drawer, a strange smell in the air. Someone had been inside. I ran to the envelope with the documents. Checked the letters, the photos. And I noticed. The photo of the man with my mother was gone. They were erasing everything again. And then, as if fate responded, the landline rang. A sound I barely ever heard. I answered, heart racing. A male voice, deep, emotionless. Stop looking for him. You don't know who he was. You won't like what you find. Before I could reply, he hung up. And in that instant I understood the truth wasn't just dangerous. It was deadly. But I also knew with the same certainty. I wasn't going to stop. That voice still echoed in my head. You don't know who he was. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. A cold sentence. As if what was behind Gabriel's story wasn't just a family secret, but something dirty, buried with fingernails and alive enough to claw at anyone who dared to dig. I began my search for Cruzado, the only way one searches for ghosts, in the forgotten alleys of history. I went back to old newspapers, those that smelled of mold and were kept in microfilm at the libraries. I spent hours flipping through yellowed pages looking for crimes, disappearances, any mention of the nickname. And in an April 1985 edition I found the first clue. Suspect known as Cruzado disappears after police operation in the South Zone. According to neighbors, the man, about 30 years old, had ties to paramilitary groups of the time and had previously been reported for domestic violence and threats. Police did not confirm involvement, but residents said his home was found empty with blood stains on the floor. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. Blood stains. The nickname was real. So were the reports. And his disappearance. Maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. I returned to my mother's friend, Nia, and showed her the article. She turned pale. He had power. Not in the political sense. In fear. People avoided crossing his path. And those who knew too much vanished. Do you think he's dead? She looked at me like someone watching a child play with fire. If he is, it's better for you. If not, then someone's been guarding this for a long time. And now you're poking the shadow. I left with a strange feeling, like I was being followed by the past, and something else. That same day, I received a message from Gabriel. I dreamed of a house with bars. Dark. It smelled of mold. Like a basement. My blood ran cold. He didn't know anything about what I was discovering. And yet his subconscious seemed to know. As if his body remembered what his mind could not reach. I went back to adoption records based on the date of Cruzado's disappearance. Looked into orphanages, foster homes, private clinics in the region. Until one employee, moved by my persistence, gave me a lead. There was an unregistered case. A baby left at a private clinic, no birth certificate, no mother's name, just an envelope with money. That was in February 1985. The baby was transferred months later to a religious institution. I wrote it all down. Santa Clara Institute. I went there. It was an old building with high walls and wooden windows. The nun who greeted me was stern and spoke little. She said the old records had been lost in a fire. But at the end of our conversation, as I stood to leave, she whispered, "Some memories don't burn." And she handed me a small yellowed note with an acronym and a number. 63. It was all she could tell me. I took it home like it was gold. The moment I walked in, I found my door unlocked. This time, whoever broke in hadn't bothered to hide it. My room was trashed. Boxes overturned. Letters torn. And on my bed, a note written in red pen. Last warning. The next visit won't be so quiet. My body shook. But inside me, something stronger than fear began to rise. Fury. I was no longer doing this just for myself. Or even just for Gabriel. I was doing it for everyone who had been erased. Including that baby left in a basement. Including the woman who never had the courage to speak her truth. Including my father who tried to warn, and died before he could. And if someone wanted to bury me with the truth, they could dig deep. I would go to the end. That note with CX23 felt like a ciphered code, an invitation, a dark key to dive deeper into a past that haunted me. There was no time to lose, even though fear threatened to freeze each step. I started researching online. Digital archives, obscure forums, old lists of institutions in the region. Nothing clear. The name CX23 didn't appear anywhere. It was as if the code had been invented to vanish, just like I felt. Someone who digs and is erased. But I didn't give up. I went back to the address of the Santa Clara Institute. It had religious and institutional ties. The building was old, its walls peeling, windows creaking, and an oppressive silence. The front door was locked, but I entered through a side gate broken and overgrown. Stepping inside felt like crossing a portal to a forgotten world, where painful stories were buried forever. Inside, I found a small, abandoned file room filled with yellowed folders and weathered papers. I began leafing through documents, searching for any connection between CX23 and a name or date. Hours passed as the sun faded and my hands ached. Then I discovered a nearly erased file with shaky handwriting and a faded stamp. The baby's name was blank, but the number matched: CX23. The entry date was February 1985, exactly when the woman at the clinic had mentioned an unregistered baby. There wasn't much more information, only that the child had been isolated for months before being transferred to a city orphanage. But what chilled me most was a comment in the margin: sensitive case. Disclosure prohibited. Superior orders. An official silence. A black box no one could open. I couldn't turn back. That night my home was invaded again. Lights flickered, doors slammed on their own, and the air felt too thick to breathe. My phone buzzed with another anonymous message: stop before it's too late. The warning was clear, but my heart no longer felt fear. It felt resolve. I had to protect Gabriel. I needed to find out what really happened and why our story mattered so much to whoever was chasing me. The next day, I decided to visit the orphanage where the child had been relocated. The building still stood, though repurposed and repaired. I spoke with the longest-serving employee, who told me stories of lost children, unexplained disappearances, and illicit adoptions. She mentioned a closed wing shut down since the 90s, where problematic children were kept hidden from public view. A silence within silence, and it seemed possible Gabriel had been there. Every step toward the truth pushed me closer to an abyss, where past and present blurred, and where the price of truth might be my life. But I couldn't stop, not after everything I had discovered. Now more than ever I was alone, or so I thought, because at that very moment, a shadow moved in my room and a voice whispered my name. And I knew the game had just begun. That voice calling my name in the dark made my heart race like never before. My eyes tried to adjust to the dim light, but I couldn't see anyone. It was as though the air itself carried an unseen presence, something clinging to me, refusing to let go. I rose slowly, body tense, senses on high alert. Every step I took in the silent house felt like a scream in the night. My mind raced, trying to piece together a puzzle that grew more confusing with each clue. I knew this pursuit wasn't just about me or Gabriel. It was bigger. An ancient secret so deeply buried that those protecting it were willing to do anything to keep the veil intact. I decided I needed help. I called Nia, my only trusted connection in this tangled web of deception and shadows. She answered with concern and unexpected determination. Isadora, you're not alone. I know people who can help, but it has to be discreet. You're meddling with dangerous folks. I accepted their help without hesitation. The next day we met in a hidden cafe downtown, far from prying eyes. Nia brought a man named Marcos, a former police officer who left the force after uncovering corrupt schemes involving disappearances. He knew more than he let on, and his weary eyes revealed a life full of secrets. Marcos explained that Cruzado was not just a common criminal, but a key piece in a corrupt 1980s power network. He had influence, ties to paramilitaries and corrupt politicians, and was famous for silencing anyone threatening his interests. The story of Gabriel fit that dark puzzle, a baby who carried a secret too dangerous to expose. With their support, I started gathering documents, photos, testimonies, and old recordings. Each new clue tightened the noose, but also fueled my determination. I knew the risks, but now I had allies, a small light in the darkness. Meanwhile, Gabriel began recalling fragments, dreams and sensations once disconnected. He sensed a presence, a call he couldn't understand, yet tied to everything I was discovering. His quest for identity was merging with mine, forming a truth that would forever change what we thought we knew about our family. But deep down I knew the biggest challenge was yet to come. Whoever Cruzado was, and whoever was protecting his secret, wouldn't give up without a fight. And I had to be ready for whatever came, even if it meant confronting my own fears and shadows. The truth was closer than ever. And nothing would ever be the same. The nights had grown longer and the days heavier with uncertainty. I could feel unseen eyes on me, the air thick as though the truth I sought carried a physical weight. Gabriel and I were connected by an invisible thread, stretching tighter with each discovery, giving me strength to continue despite the exhaustion creeping into every muscle of my body. Marcos, the ex-policeman, managed to give me a list of names that, according to him, were tied to Cruzado's dark past. Among them were politicians, cops, and businessmen who for decades had been building an empire of silence. It was a chessboard where pieces moved slowly, but with lethal intent. I decided I needed concrete proof to expose everything, and the key was at the old Santa Clara Institute. With Marcos's help, we planned a nighttime visit to the abandoned building. We entered stealthily, walking through cold, echoing corridors. Every step sounded in the heavy silence, as if the walls held the cries of forgotten children and broken promises. In the basement's depths, we found a locked room draped in spiderwebs and dust. After a few minutes of effort, we forced the door open. Inside, we discovered aging documents, records of missing children, medical reports, and a yellowed photograph that froze my blood. A baby with closed eyes, clutching a cloth tagged CX23. It was Gabriel, my brother. There were also documents referring to unauthorized experiments and treatments, and a name I had never heard before chilling me to the core. Dr. Morera. Files described studies for control and manipulation, all funded by obscure money and silenced by threats. We fled quickly, but before making it home we realized we were being followed. Our adrenaline surged as we ran through dark streets, finally losing them in a narrow alley. That night, sitting in my living room, I reflected on everything. This was much bigger than a fractured family. It was a network of power, fear, and silence protecting itself at all costs. Still, I knew I couldn't give up. The truth about my brother, about our past, needed to come out, not just for me but for him, for all of us. As darkness deepened, my resolve grew fiercer. After that night, the fear of being watched became constant. Every strange sound, every shadow felt like a warning. But truth had claimed me and there was no turning back. Gabriel was closer to me than ever, and even with his memory gaps, I sensed he was fighting to reclaim his own identity. I believed I held the key. In the days that followed, I intensified my search on Dr. Morera, learning he had vanished mysteriously in the 1990s, shortly after rumors of experiments began to circulate. His name remained in archives, always present in unofficial accounts and documents that disappeared before going public. It was as if he'd left a trail of shadows and false leads to keep others from finding him. Meanwhile, Marcos found an informant who claimed to have worked at Santa Clara Institute, an old, bitter man reluctant to speak, but ultimately convinced by the urgency of my quest. He confirmed that children like Gabriel were used in secret tests, and many never left that place. Some, he said, disappeared, forever. The word echoed in my mind. Vanished, erased from history. Then came another anonymous phone call, a raspy voice saying, "Stop before it's too late. You're digging your own grave." And the line went dead. Another clear threat. But instead of backing down, a deep anger rose in me. This was no longer just a quest for answers. It was a fight for justice, for those who never had a voice, for the forgotten brother I would no longer abandon. Despite his fragmented memory, Gabriel seemed to grow stronger. He began opening up about confused dreams, faces he didn't know, voices calling his name. His search was as urgent as mine. We decided it was time to confront the past head-on. Marcos pointed us to a house on the city outskirts, an abandoned site where experiments may have continued after the institute closed. If we wanted truth, that's where we had to go, even knowing how dangerous it could be. That night, preparing to face the unknown again, I felt fear, anxiety, and an iron resolve. Because I finally understood that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could free my brother and myself. We arrived at the abandoned house in the dead of night, when the city slept, unaware of what we were about to uncover. Cold wind cut across my face, and the silence was almost total, broken only by dried leaves underfoot. The structure was dilapidated, broken windows, doors hanging off hinges, a perfect hiding place for dark secrets. We entered cautiously, eyes peeled for movement. Inside, dense shadows and the stench of mildew and neglect filled every room. We followed traces of files, scattered papers, and rusty equipment, abandoned in haste. In what appeared to be an office, we discovered an old diary tucked under a loose floorboard. The pages were yellowed, handwriting shaky, but each word throbbed with urgency. It was written by one of the scientists involved, revealing horrifying details about the children who'd passed through, including direct references to Gabriel, or CX-23, as he was called. He described sessions, endurance tests, and attempts at mental and physical manipulation with chilling detachment. He also mentioned a bigger project, a plan to control not only bodies but wills and minds. It confirmed what I'd suspected. Gabriel had been the victim of something far more sinister than we'd imagined. While I read, Marcos stood guard at the door, tense and alert. Suddenly, a noise upstairs alerted us. Someone was there. We dove for cover behind a stack of boxes and waited. The door creaked open and a hooded figure entered with a flashlight. My heart pounded. I tried not to freeze, but adrenaline kept me tense. It was a lone man rifling through the files, oblivious to our presence. When our eyes met, chills ran down my spine. He recognized me instantly. Without a word, he pulled out a phone and dialed quickly, whispering something inaudible. We knew time was short. We escaped through corridors, dodging shadows, leaping over debris, and didn't stop until we were out under the starry night sky. It was clear. This was a game far beyond anything I'd imagined. But I couldn't quit. For Gabriel, for us, I would face anything, to the end. After fleeing the abandoned house, the sense of being hunted intensified. Every move we made was watched. Every call could trigger an alarm. There was no place for hesitation. We needed strategy and speed. The truth, however urgent, demanded careful planning. Marcos suggested we find a temporary refuge outside the city, to organize documents, analyze info, and plan next steps. We moved to a rural house, isolated, where wind and trees contrasted with the storm brewing inside us. There we gathered everything: institute records, the scientist's diary, photos, anonymous messages, and Gabriel's accounts. As the pieces fell into place, a terrifying blueprint emerged. A secret project funded by powerful groups to control not only children but future leaders, shaping wills from infancy. I couldn't shake what that meant for Gabriel. He wasn't just my brother, he was a key piece in this sinister game. Protecting someone so fragile, yet so important, gave me strength I never knew I had. While poring over documents, a new clue surfaced. A list of names of people, still alive, who could testify. Among them was a doctor who'd refused to participate in the experiments and fled with crucial evidence. We knew finding this doctor could be the key to bringing down the whole scheme. We committed to tracking her down, though we knew it meant venturing into even more dangerous territory. That night, as darkness fell and the rural refuge became our secret base, Gabriel and I shared a look, a mix of fear and hope. We weren't finished, but at last we felt the light at the end of the tunnel. And I knew that together we would face whatever came, because the truth could no longer be silenced. The search for the doctor who could bring down the entire secret scheme wasn't easy. We followed scattered leads through several cities, encountering closed doors, suspicious stares, and veiled threats. With every step, I felt the weight of responsibility grow, not just for me and Gabriel but for all the children who had suffered in silence. Finally, in a small town in the countryside, we found Clara. A woman with a steady gaze and a calm voice who carried a story as painful as ours. She told us how, years ago, she had refused to continue participating in the experiments at the Santa Clara Institute and managed to escape, taking documents that could prove everything. But the truth, she said, was a dangerous weapon, and anyone who sought it would pay a heavy price. With her support, we began assembling a complete dossier, gathering evidence, testimonies, and reports that exposed the scope of manipulation and forced silence. Clara also helped us better understand the methods used, the motives behind the project, and the influence it still had over many lives. The danger grew, but so did our determination. Now, with witnesses and solid proof, we were ready to take the next step, to expose everything publicly and finally confront those who had tried to erase our past. But first, I needed to prepare for what was coming, because the battle was only beginning, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. After weeks of relentless searching, wandering unfamiliar streets and facing wary strangers, we finally reached Clara. She lived in a modest house in a town forgotten by time, where the trees swayed slowly and silence seemed to guard ancient secrets. When we opened the door, I was overwhelmed by a strange mix of hope and fear. Hope that someone could help us uncover the truth, and fear of what still lay ahead. Clara welcomed us with a steady, almost defiant gaze, hiding a deep sadness. Her voice trembled slightly as she told her story, revealing the burden she had carried for so long. She spoke of the Santa Clara Institute not just as a place, but as a prison for bodies and souls, where science had become a cruel weapon. She recounted the endless days watching children like Gabriel endure brutal tests, of doctors who had lost their humanity, and of a system that crushed any sign of resistance. Clara revealed how, one night, driven by courage and desperation, she escaped with confidential documents, proof that could bring down the entire web of lies. But even then she knew the truth was a dangerous fire, capable of consuming not only the guilty but also the innocent. As she spoke, I felt a surge of anger and compassion rise within me. The courage of that woman was the spark I needed to keep going. Clara didn't just give us the documents. She became an indispensable ally, helping us interpret the codes, understand the complexity of the experiments, and grasp the sinister reach of those still trying to control the narrative. We realized we were facing something much larger than we'd imagined. A scheme that involved not only power and money, but lives scarred forever by invisible traumas. Our dossier grew by the day, a heavy archive of evidence, testimonies, and stories that revealed not only the horror of the experiments, but the immense courage of the victims fighting to be heard. Clara warned us of the risks of going public, but also of the urgent need for justice. The sense of danger was constant. With each step we knew we were getting closer to confronting powerful enemies who would do anything to preserve their silence. Yet amid all the looming threats, we also felt a thin thread of hope. The truth, no matter how painful, had the power to set us free. I saw it in Gabriel's eyes as he gradually uncovered fragments of himself, rebuilding the identity that had been stolen from him. I felt it within me, a renewed strength to fight to protect my brother and to give a voice to all those still trapped in the shadows. As night fell, I braced myself for the battle ahead. I knew nothing would ever be the same, that the road forward would be harsh and full of sacrifice. But I also knew that, finally, we were ready to confront the past, reveal the truth, and break the cycle of silence that had kept my brother, and so many others, buried in the dark for so long. And so, with a heavy heart and unwavering resolve, I stepped into the next chapter of our fight. A fight that was no longer just ours, but for everyone who still believed in justice, in truth, and in freedom. The days that followed were intense, marked by a constant mix of hope and fear. With Clara by our side, we finally had a clear path to dismantle what remained of that dark project. But the feeling of being watched never left us. Every phone call, every meeting felt surrounded by invisible shadows, reminding us that at any moment we could be intercepted. It was in this tense atmosphere that we began planning the release of the evidence we'd gathered, fully aware that truth came at a high price. We knew the world needed to hear our story, that the victims' voices had to be amplified. But we couldn't simply throw everything online or hand it to the media. The risk of manipulation or even the erasure of evidence was very real. So we chose a more cautious route. Legal channels, lawyers who believed in the cause, and investigative journalists brave enough to face the power behind the silence. Each contact we made was a careful step on a chessboard where enemies lurked in the shadows of influence and corruption. At the same time, Gabriel and I were trying to rebuild our relationship, a bond the years and pain had nearly erased. He still struggled with the ghosts of a fragmented past, but with every conversation, every shared moment, I saw his courage begin to shine, like a flame resisting the darkness. His strength inspired me, and I realized that together, we were more than brothers torn apart by life. We were a force capable of facing any storm. But we couldn't ignore the warnings. One night, I found an anonymous note on our doorstep. Give up before it's too late. The threat was clear and fear hit hard, but it didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, it fueled my determination. I knew we were nearing a point of no return, where everything could collapse or transform into victory. We decided it was time to make a public move. Organize a press conference with journalists and activists, present the evidence we had collected, and reveal to the world what was hidden behind the walls of the Santa Clara Institute. But before that, Clara revealed there was one last secret. A hidden file, the final piece of the puzzle, one that could be the definitive proof to bring the entire structure down. But finding that file would take courage, and a direct confrontation with those responsible, who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. And so, with a heart heavy from responsibility and eyes fixed on the battle ahead, we prepared for this final challenge. Because, in the end, it was more than just a personal fight. It was a fight for justice, for truth, for everyone who had been silenced. I knew that even if the road ahead was dangerous and uncertain, I would never give up again. Because the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could truly set us free. The days that followed were intense, marked by a mix of hope and constant fear. With Clara by our side, we finally had a clear roadmap to dismantle what remained of that dark project, but the feeling of being watched never left us. Every call, every meeting seemed surrounded by invisible shadows, reminding us that we could be intercepted at any moment. It was in that tense atmosphere that we began planning how to release the evidence we had gathered, fully aware that the truth came with a high price. We knew the public needed to hear our story, that the voices of the victims needed to be amplified. But we couldn't just throw everything on social media or hand it over to newspapers. The risk of manipulation or even deletion of evidence was real. So we sought legal means. Lawyers committed to the cause, investigative journalists willing to face the power behind the silence. Each contact we made was a delicate step on a chessboard where enemies hid in the shadows of power and corruption. At the same time, Gabriel and I tried to rebuild our relationship, the connection that time and pain had tried to erase. He was still battling the ghosts of a fragmented past, and with every conversation, every shared moment, I saw his courage emerge like a flame resisting the darkness. His strength inspired me, and I realized that together, we were much more than siblings separated by life. We were a force capable of weathering any storm. But we couldn't ignore the warnings. One night, I received an anonymous note left at my door. "Give up before it's too late." The threat was clear and fear struck hard, but it didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, it fueled my determination. I knew we were nearing a point of no return, where everything could either collapse or become a victory. We decided it was time to go public, to organize a press conference with journalists and activists, to present the evidence we had gathered and reveal to the world what was hidden behind the walls of the Santa Clara Institute. But before that, Clara revealed one last secret. A hidden file, the final piece of the puzzle that could be the ultimate proof needed to bring the entire structure down. But finding that file would require courage and direct confrontation with the people responsible. People who were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. And so, with heavy hearts and unwavering focus, we prepared for this final challenge. Because it was no longer just our fight. It was a fight for justice, for truth, for all those who had been silenced. I knew that even if the road ahead was dangerous and uncertain, I would never turn back. Because the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that could truly set us free. The search for the hidden file became our obsession. Clara revealed that the document was the last piece of the puzzle. The definitive record proving the extent of the experiments and the direct involvement of powerful figures who could never afford to be exposed. According to her, it was hidden in a subterranean vault beneath the old administrative building of the Santa Clara Institute, a place long abandoned but never forgotten by those who had worked there. We decided we would go there, even knowing we'd be entering highly dangerous territory where cameras, alarms, and possibly even guards might still be active. Every step required meticulous planning, and the tension between us grew by the hour. Gabriel, although still vulnerable in many ways, showed a courage and determination that surprised me, as if this search were also his own redemption. On the chosen night, we dressed in dark clothing and infiltrated the building under the cover of near-total darkness. The cold, damp air filled our lungs as we walked through the silent hallways, the sound of our footsteps echoing like a warning. The old building felt like a monument to the dark past we were trying to unearth. Walls stained with age and graffiti, doors that creaked with the slightest touch. We found the vault in a locked room hidden behind a fallen bookcase. The combination was a mystery, but Clara, using her knowledge of the old staff, managed to crack the code after a few minutes that felt like an eternity. When the vault door opened, we were hit by the scent of old metal, revealing folders, documents, tapes, and photographs, everything we needed to prove the truth. As we combed through the contents, I heard a sound behind us. Heavy, hurried footsteps. My heart raced. We hid behind a pile of boxes. A deep voice echoed in the hallway, issuing orders to stop any disclosure. We knew it was time to move, fast. With the documents in hand, we managed to escape by a hair's breadth, fear driving us through the shadows to the relative safety of the street. That night marked a turning point. We had gone from hunters to targets. Back at our safe house, with the evidence finally secured, we began to plan the big reveal. The danger was intense, but so was the relief. We now had what we needed to dismantle the empire of lies that had for years imprisoned my brother and so many other lives in an invisible cage. I knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like victory was possible, and that no secret could silence us anymore. The days following our escape from the Santa Clara Institute's old building were a turbulent mix of adrenaline and tense silence. We knew that with the documents in our possession we finally had the truth to expose, but we had also become clear targets of those who did not want anything revealed. Every unexpected sound, every shadow on the street made my heart race. Paranoia became almost inevitable. Gabriel tried to remain calm, but I could see the reflection of fear in his eyes. Meanwhile, Clara worked tirelessly to organize and validate the information, preparing everything for the moment of disclosure. We knew we needed allies, trusted journalists, dedicated lawyers, and activists ready to stand against the tide of power we were up against. The challenge was immense, but so was the hope. We arranged a secret meeting with an investigative reporter known for her commitment to difficult causes. When we showed her the dossier, I watched her expression shift from disbelief to shock, then to firm resolve. She was exactly the ally we needed to bring the story to the public safely and powerfully. In the following weeks, everything changed. Reports began to emerge, slowly revealing the truth behind the Santa Clara Institute and its horrific practices. The public reaction was immediate: outrage, solidarity with the victims, and a growing outcry for justice. Gradually, the pieces began to move. Official investigations were launched, testimonies from former staff came forward, and the system that had tried to silence the voices of pain began to crumble. But alongside our partial victory came direct threats. One night, a car stopped in front of my house, headlights on, and a low voice warned me to stop, or the consequences would be irreversible. But in that moment, looking at Gabriel asleep beside me, I knew I couldn't retreat. This was more than a personal fight. It was a cry for everyone whose stories had been buried. Truth has its price, but it also has immense power. And together, we would keep fighting until no secret could remain hidden in the shadows. As the exposure of the Santa Clara Institute's atrocities gained traction in the media, the pressure on all of us grew exponentially. Those responsible began to retreat, but they also retaliated in subtle and cruel ways. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, attempts to discredit our sources, and even the removal of Clara, whose name was dragged through social media and the local press. We felt the weight of the battle not only on ourselves, but on everyone who had joined our cause. But truth, once revealed, holds a power no threat can silence. The public outcry forced the authorities to act more firmly, launching formal inquiries and summoning witnesses. Gabriel, though still fragile from trauma, decided to testify, a courageous act that shook the public conscience. I saw in him a strength I hadn't known existed, a steel resolve to fight not only for himself, but for all the children who had suffered in silence. The legal battle was long and exhausting. Each hearing was a mixture of tension and hope. But as the investigations advanced, arrests began, and the system that had long fed on secrecy and manipulation began to fall apart. The feeling of victory, although still distant, began to take shape on the horizon. At the same time, we started rebuilding our lives. Gabriel returned to school, slowly finding a space where he could just be a child. I dedicated myself to supporting other families who, like us, were seeking answers and justice. Clara, despite the attacks, remained steadfast, becoming a respected voice in the fight against institutional abuse. In the end, I understood that what changed everything wasn't just discovering a forgotten brother, but the courage to give voice to the invisible, to turn pain into resistance and silence into truth. Our story, which began in darkness, now illuminated paths for many still searching for the light. And so, despite the scars and the battles, I knew that the future finally held a real promise, that the truth, no matter how difficult, always finds its way. Little by little, our routine regained a calmer rhythm, but something inside me had changed forever. Discovering my brother Gabriel wasn't just a shock. It was a silent revolution that dismantled the world I knew and built a new one, fragmented, yet filled with possibilities. I felt oddly torn between the past I longed to forget and the future that was beginning to unfold, uncertain yet full of hope. Each morning when I looked at Gabriel, I saw more than a brother. I saw a survivor, a fighter carrying invisible scars, yet also an astonishing strength of rebirth. Together we faced the trauma, rebuilding a bond time and silence had tried to erase. It wasn't easy. the ghosts of the past reappeared at unexpected times, but every milestone, every shy smile of his, was a victory that brightened our days. Meanwhile, public impact regarding the Santa Clara Institute continued to grow. Social movements emerged, debates were fueled, and society seemed to awaken to a reality previously buried. I had the opportunity to speak at lectures, interviews, and events, using my voice to represent not only myself but all those who still couldn't speak. It was a heavy responsibility, one I embraced with determination. On the legal front, the battles were far from over. Many cases were still ongoing, and those involved in the scandal were maneuvering to evade consequences. But with each passing day, our support network strengthened. Lawyers, journalists, activists, all united in a solid coalition against the system of silence and impunity. Inside me, a profound transformation was taking root. Discovering Gabriel forced me to confront my own truths, fears, and limitations. The pain I carried became fuel for transformation, and I gradually learned that the past, no matter how dark, doesn't have to define who we are. We are more than our secrets and scars. In the quiet of the night, I often reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. But above all, I felt gratitude, for Gabriel, for Clara, for everyone who joined our fight, and for myself for finding the courage to face the unknown. The truth at last wasn't a hidden burden, it was a light guiding our path. Although the future remained uncertain, I knew we were ready to face it together. Because in the end, the family we choose and the truth we embrace are the forces that sustain us when everything seems to collapse. As time passed, the sense of building something new alongside Gabriel grew stronger each day. Although the weight of the past never completely disappeared, we began creating memories not marked by pain, but by moments of laughter, discovery, and small celebrations of everyday life. These little victories were essential to rebuilding not just our bond, but the hope that once seemed lost. However, the battle against the Santa Clara Institute was far from over. Even with evidence exposed and those responsible under investigation, a web of powerful interests worked relentlessly to prevent the truth from fully emerging. During a confidential meeting with our allies, we learned they were planning to discredit Clara and other crucial witnesses and launch disinformation campaigns against the victims. This made clear our journey would be long and full of challenges. One night, Gabriel asked me with touching sincerity, "Will this ever end? Can we just be normal brothers someday?" His simple question struck me deeply. I realized that despite the battle, he still yearned for a normal life, one free from the shadows that haunted us. I promised myself I would do everything possible to make that dream come true, even if it meant facing every obstacle with greater determination. Meanwhile, I became involved in support groups for other families in similar situations. These connections strengthened me, showing that our story was just one among many, and that change depended on collective unity and courage. With every story I heard, my commitment to the cause was renewed, and I realized my voice could be a powerful tool to turn suffering into hope. Despite the ongoing dangers, we learned to find strength in simple moments. An afternoon in the park, an honest conversation before bed, a tight hug that spoke louder than 1,000 words. These moments of normalcy were, and still are, what kept us standing. Thus, between public and private battles, we pressed on, determined to transform not only our story but the stories of all those who lived in the shadow of oblivion. Months passed, and I realized that our fight's impact extended beyond the walls of the Santa Clara Institute. It reverberated throughout society. Exposure of the abuses triggered a broader movement against impunity and silence in institutions meant to protect and nurture, but which had often failed in their most basic duty. It was a collective awakening, a voice growing stronger with the efforts of thousands who finally felt encouraged to tell their own stories. Gabriel, in turn, began to show clear signs of transformation. Therapy sessions, constant support, and the safe environment we built started to pay off. He began to trust me, Clara, and most importantly, himself. Seeing that boy, forgotten by his own family, reclaim his identity and self-esteem was one of the greatest rewards of my journey. Yet the powerful didn't relent. New attempts to silence us emerged, dragging legal processes, intimidation efforts, and even threats that forced us to redouble vigilance. Amid this pressure, I learned the true meaning of resilience. Our fight was not only against individuals responsible, but against a system often impenetrable and willing to maintain appearances at any cost. In one meeting with Clara and our lawyers, we discussed strategies to expand our support network and reach international institutions, seeking protection and visibility for the cause. We needed to ensure no maneuver could silence us and that justice, though slow, was inevitable. The group's unity filled me with hope and courage. Simultaneously, Gabriel and I began planning our future. We dreamt of a life where the word silence no longer existed, where we could look back without fear and forward with confidence. This dream, though distant, was the fuel that drove us onward. With each step, I felt our story become more than just mine and Gabriel's. It was about all the voices rising, about the power born from truth and unity. And despite adversity, we knew we were on the right path. The sun was setting when we received the news we'd been waiting for. The trial of those responsible for the Santa Clara Institute was officially scheduled. A wave of relief and nervous anticipation swept over us. We knew this moment was decisive, the moment when all the evidence, testimonies, and struggles would be tested in court. This was our opportunity to finally give voice to the victims and ensure justice prevailed. Gabriel, despite all the trauma, decided to face the courtroom with courage. Watching his determination gave me strength to believe that even in the most difficult circumstances, hope can still bloom. Clara and our team prepared everything meticulously, reviewing documents and testimonies so that nothing would be left to chance. While we waited for the trial date, I tried to find balance between maintaining our routine and preparing for what was to come. Every moment with Gabriel felt precious. Simple moments that now carried a deeper meaning because we knew the future was still uncertain but now full of real possibilities. In court, the sessions were intense. The defense tried to discredit the evidence, but the strength of the truth was on our side. Emotional testimonies, irrefutable proof, and the tireless fight of everyone involved gradually made the system begin to give way. Meanwhile, our story gained national media attention, reaching hearts and minds across the country. People began to speak out, to demand change, and to support victims of other institutions who were also facing abuse. And amid this whirlwind, I understood something fundamental. Discovering a forgotten brother didn't just change my life. It triggered a greater transformation that would echo far beyond our small family universe. I knew the road ahead was still long, but finally, the light of justice began to dissipate the shadows of the past. The trial progressed, and with each hearing, the sense of imminent justice grew stronger. Brave witnesses gave their testimonies, and the exposed truth shattered the desperate defenses of the accused. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, but also charged with a renewing energy, the energy of those who fight to break silence and reclaim lost dignity. Gabriel faced each day with surprising strength, showing a maturity that filled me with pride. He was no longer that forgotten boy, but a living symbol of resistance and hope. Every time I looked at him, I felt the weight of our journey, but also the certainty that everything we'd gone through was worth it. Between sessions, we continued our healing routine. Small celebrations took place in the simplest of moments. A dinner together, a walk in the park, spontaneous laughter that cut through the heavy air brought by the trial. These glimpses of normality were what kept us grounded. Finally, after months of struggle, the verdict was announced. The court acknowledged the crimes and convicted those responsible. The relief I felt was indescribable. A mixture of victory and justice that seemed at last to crown our efforts. But the fight wasn't over. We knew there was still a long road ahead to ensure the system would never again allow such atrocities to repeat. We would continue our battle, now armed with experience and the strength of a solid support network. Looking at Gabriel, smiling with a lightness that once seemed impossible, I realized that this forgotten brother had changed everything, not just for me but for everyone who believed in the power of truth and love. Our story, marked by pain and courage, had now become a legacy. A call to transformation and hope for those still living in silence. With the conviction of those responsible, it felt like a new chapter had begun for all of us. A chapter where fear and silence finally gave way to hope and reconstruction. Gabriel and I were free, but we knew that the scars left behind would never fully disappear. Even so, there was a sense of peace that had once felt unattainable. The following months were devoted to healing, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. Gabriel began to dream again, to plan, to imagine a future beyond the shadows that had haunted us for so long. As for me, I drew strength from his resilience and from the unwavering support of Clara and the friends we had made along the way. I began writing our story, not just to document the facts but to give voice to those who, like us, needed to know they were not alone. Each word was an act of courage, an invitation to reflection and change. Writing became therapy, a way to transform the past into learning and hope. Slowly, our lives began to align with new purposes. Gabriel went back to school more confident and happy, and I started dedicating myself to projects aimed at helping children and families break cycles of silence and abuse. What began as a painful discovery became a mission: to transform pain into strength, forgetfulness into memory, and fear into action. Looking back still stirred a complex mix of emotions, but above all, a deep pride in the journey we had walked together. Discovering a forgotten brother wasn't just a shock. It was the beginning of our true liberation. And so, one chapter closed so that another could begin, one filled with light, truth, and love. Even after the courtroom victory and the apparent calm that had settled into our lives, something unsettling wouldn't let me rest. At night, when the silence of the house took over, I felt an invisible presence, a whisper that seemed to pull me back toward secrets yet to be uncovered. A creeping sense that the story Gabriel and I had lived was only a part of something much larger began to take hold in my mind, like a shadow stretching beyond what I could comprehend. It began with small signs. An anonymous email arrived in my inbox with a simple but disturbing message. "You think you know the truth? You're far from it." The sender was unknown and there were no clues about their identity, but the message was clear. Our fight wasn't over, and maybe it never would be. That same week, I received a call in the middle of the night. A distorted, cold voice that repeated a single phrase before hanging up. "Look within. The past isn't dead." I tried to trace the call's origin, but it was impossible. It felt like someone was playing a dark game, pulling the invisible threads that connected our lives to deep, dangerous secrets. I decided to investigate on my own. I combed through old files, forgotten documents, unpublished interviews. And that's when I found something that nearly stopped my heart. References to a name I had never heard before, a name that seemed linked not only to the Santa Clara Institute, but to a clandestine network operating in the shadows, protected by powerful interests that reached far beyond what I had imagined. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that my search for my lost brother was only the tip of the iceberg. There was a larger system, a web of corruption and secrets that had consumed lives, manipulated destinies, and silenced voices for decades. And worse, someone or something wanted to make sure it all stayed hidden. Gabriel sensed the tension too. Sometimes his gaze would drift off, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach, as if he too could feel that the past still held traps for us. But unlike me, he preferred to withdraw, to shield himself from what he couldn't face. I, on the other hand, felt an urgent need to go on, to peel back every layer of that dark truth, even if it meant walking again into dangerous territory. And then, on a rainy night while reviewing old documents, I noticed a detail I had missed before. A series of numbers and dates, seemingly random but which, when aligned, formed a pattern. A code. An invitation, or perhaps a challenge, to keep uncovering what many wished would stay buried. The mystery was far from over. In fact, I was beginning to understand it might never end, not as long as there were those determined to keep the truth hidden. Gabriel and I stood at a crossroads. Move forward and face the unknown, or step back and accept that silence was the only answer. But there was no turning back. The truth was calling, dark, urgent, and irresistible. And I knew that to protect my brother and our family, I would have to go further than I ever had before. The journey was only beginning.